Om Yam Brahmanendra Rudra Marutaha Stunvanti Davoishtavoi Vedai Sangapada Kramo Upanishadoi Gyantiyam Samagaha Dhyanavashtita Tadgatena Manasya Prashantiyam Yogino Yashantam Navidhu Sura Suragana Devaya Tasmai Namaha. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Our eternal salutations to that one who is the truth of life and existence, and whom the saints and sages call by various names. Our eternal salutations to that one whose glories are sung in the scriptures of the different religious traditions of the world, but whose infinite and undying grandeur no mortal mind can comprehend. Our eternal salutations to that one upon whom the devotees meditate in the shrine of their hearts, realizing an ineffable presence in their deepest contemplations. May he prompt our minds toward the path of truth and righteousness. May she reveal herself into our souls and dispel the gloom of death, fear, doubt, and darkness. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. Good morning to everyone on this Hawaiian morning. We're coming to you, as they say, we are the first ones to start the morning in the United States here in Hawaii. It's very early here. It's also a very rainy early morning. It's also Easter morning. So those facets have come together to allow us to meet for satsang, which is always one of the best things to do as early as you can possibly do it in life or in your day. Satsang is encountering the teachings face to face and discussing through the tradition of Atma Vichara, or inquiry into the nature of the true self, the true reality, so that we can separate the wheat from the chaff, to borrow one of Christ's teachings, and come to know the distinction between Purusha and Prakriti, if we want to put it in the oldest of terms in the Samkhya philosophy of India. Purusha being the sentient soul, and Prakriti being the insentient, immaterial nature, matter. And along those lines, questions have come in for satsang this morning. For those of you who are watching live stream, we welcome you to our SRV ashram. And those of us who have met for an hour's meditation this morning are present here, so we can have some questions and answers about these pertinent subjects, pertinent to our spiritual life, because spiritual life has a distinction of its own, distinct from earthly life, very definitely distinct from what's called worldly life or ignorant life, and also even distinct from religious life, although it has a connection there. We hope to take religion and deepen it, intensify it, take it more inward to the kingdoms of heaven within, and start to make connections with axioms that stretch from dual to qualified non-dual, all the way up to non-dual or Advaita levels of consciousness. These are all parts of one's own consciousness. So to observe these distinctions is tantamount to realizing the absence of all distinctions when the mind finally goes into a state of non-dual samadhi, or beatific vision, or satori, or nirvana, however it's called in various religious traditions. So the questions that come in today have to do with many of these things which I've just summated in this brief introduction. The first one here on Easter Sunday is from one student who asks, why is it that one can practice viveka and see the distinction between the changing and the unchanging and still not detach from the changing? That's almost more of a statement than a question. Happens to all practitioners who find out about the import of viveka. Viveka, of course, discrimination between the real and the unreal, or the changing and the unchanging, or the essential and the non-essential. Again, the wheat and the chaff, as we were talking about. The discriminatory faculty of human beings is very precious. It's really not brought to bear in spiritual terms. In religious terms, it's brought to bear in terms of which religion one would choose to follow. And of course, in everyday life, hopefully one has that discriminating intelligence too, to discriminate between right and wrong, or moral and immoral. Make the right choices, as is said. But how it applies on the level of satsang or spiritual life has been very refined by the Vedanta. That discriminatory faculty viveka is one of the most important things for spiritual life. It happens at a very high level of consciousness that one brings that to bear. It's called honing one's intelligence sometimes, that chitta, the mind's thoughts, making the intellect one-pointed, making the I made single, if you want to put it that way, or gathering the thoughts back from a scattered state. That would be how the father of yoga would say, from scattered state to a gathered state, from a gathered state to a focused state, and from a focused state to a flat line, sort of where all vibrations of the mind go away and you get into a condition of samadhi, as I was saying. So all of that is helped along by the discriminatory faculty. And we used to call these two that are mentioned here discrimination and detachment. In Sanskrit, viveka vairagya. We used to call them the two V's that are the two D's, so that we could remember what they are and remember both their English and their Sanskrit equivalents. So it's happened to most people who start into a spiritual life that once they hear the teachings of Vedanta or Buddhism or any salient system of India's philosophy, then they begin to develop, or you might say even remember, because it's a matter of past record that you've probably done this kind of discrimination before, and you just bring it back again in this lifetime, in this present lifetime. So it happens to people that they begin to develop this faculty of discrimination, and it begins to purify mind, heart, senses, life, and even the body. And that purification is a process that leads one towards sharanagata, or self-surrender. One can then surrender oneself to the inner reality, which one was having such a problem with before because of these obstacles. Vikya, they're called in Sanskrit, or kleshas in yoga. These obstacles are impediments. So when discrimination occurs inside of the discerning mind, that's another good word for it, discernment, then one notes the distinction between the real and the unreal. And there's the famous quote by Shankara. He says, he gives us that maxim. It says, Brahman Satya Jagad Mithya. Brahman is, of course, the reality. Brahman Satya means Brahman is true, or Brahman is the truth. And then Jagad is the world, and Mithya means false, or deceiving. So the world can be false and deceiving in its appearances, and therefore draw one away to thinking that maybe God is in matter, or God is a form, when all the revealed scriptures of the world have been telling us that God is purely spiritual and God is formless in essence. So that's the first vault, you might say, in that high jump that you have to do, that broad jump you have to do to get your soul divorced from nature long enough so that you can see its essence, because it's got an admixture happening. Purusha and Prakriti are mixing up like oil and water when it's shaken, but then if you watch the oil and water separate, it takes about 45 seconds. Then you see the oil and the water separate from one another. That's the discrimination process of Purusha from Prakriti. Once it notes the distinction between the sentient and the insentient, which is another way of putting it, then the soul can begin to detach itself, vairagya, and enjoy bliss or peace, usually where flows the stream of knowledge, truth, and then the bliss that follows both, as Vivekananda put it in his poem. So knowledge comes first, and that gives you some peace of mind. And then peace of mind gives you the truth. You can meditate on the truth, and therefore you have this detachment, vairagyam. So, to get more to the point of the question, why is it that we can't detach once we've made this discriminatory move? Part of that is because of habit. The soul still clings to nature. It still seeks fulfillment in nature. It's still, that is, in objects. Nature here must be taken in a broader sense. Basically, it's the combination of the 5 elements: air, earth, fire, water, and ether, rearranging itself in different forms in front of our eyes and dancing there, as it were, as a sort of attracting power. Maya. And so those appearances, being deceiving, cause the soul to think in terms of matter, in terms of action, or action amidst matter, and of course we know that's what causes karma. So in that case, then, this withdrawal process is the key to a successful spiritual life. So when one has the boon of a human birth, and has the boon of a desire to be free, and has the boon of a good teacher and a good path, then they can make this distinctive move. They begin to hear of the distinction between the real and the unreal. Basically means sentient and insentient here. And then they can begin to detach from the unreal. Now, in that process, they say there are 10 steps, 10 stages to detachment. Those are arranged in 3 different levels. One's called mridu. Mridu means a very meek or mild detachment. It means something, if I were to give an example, like there's a man has a wife, his wife dies, and he's very sorrowful and very unhappy, but then he's married again within the next 3 months or a year. So he didn't learn the lesson of detachment, that things pass, and he goes and just engages again in another and more of the same. So the learning the lesson from suffering is that things come in rounds, which is also a kind of discernment that you're going to have to implement. That is, basically pleasure and pain come in rounds and cycles. That's part of the cycle of learning. Then this detachment can get a little stronger, and it leaves the mridu level of meek detachment, something that you give up and then it just comes back on you again, and it enters that level of madhyama detachment. And there are 3 stages of madhyama detachment that are madhyama means middling, or middle level of detachment. It gets a little stronger. And then eventually, when one is able to detach, work the muscles of detachment stronger, it gets to a very intense, or what's called adimatra level of detachment. And finally reaches paravairagya, the supreme detachment, which you saw in Christ and Buddha and beings like that. They had supreme detachment. Long ago learned the lessons of changing Maya, changing the cycles of samsara, and so now when they go about, there's no problem of attachment, or they can even attach and detach at will, as my teacher used to say. The yogi has that ability to get involved with something and immediately get uninvolved with it under the power of his own will, his own auspice. And that's, of course, signs of a more intense adimatra type of detachment. So if you find yourself hearing the distinction between the real and the unreal and wandering off back into habit, then you know that those early stages of detachment still haven't been transcended. You need to get to a more middle stage of detachment. That is, you're going to have to exert or exercise a little bit more energy and willpower to maintain a level of detachment that you set yourself to attain in the first place. So then again, the answer being, it's more a matter of habit at first, and then if you can break old habits and you can begin to attain, get that level of attainment under your belt, then detachment, vairagya, becomes more easily manageable. Now you can tell detachment because it leads to inner peace. So if you're trying to use or utilize some sort of barometer as to your spiritual progress, then viveka vairagya is supposed to lead to sama and dhamma, inner peace and self-control. So if you have inner peace and self-control, then you know your detachment has reached more than a mridu level, or meek level of abidance. So your powers of self-control are automatic. You can withdraw from situations or from thoughts in meditation immediately that you put your mind to it. It doesn't take you a long time to do so, and it's not something that haunts you and returns all the time. And if inner peace and self-control are evident in you, then the next signs of that are the ability to forbear sufferings when they come. There'll be periods of life in these cycles that are very pleasurable, very balanced, very easy, and then there'll be periods of life that come that are full of challenges and full of problems and pain and so forth come to everyone. And I find myself often answering questions from people who 6 months ago were writing about how much bliss they were having, and then all of a sudden are writing and saying that their whole life has changed and they're having so much problems. And my pat answer to them is to wait another 6 months. That's called forbearance. So you get very good at forbearance because that's the default zone of the wise. That's actually one statement I heard once of a teaching from an illumined soul. It says that detachment that is the forbearance is the default zone of the wise. That is, they've already reached enlightenment, but they're still in the body. So they can't have samadhi all the time. While you're in the body, you have to deal with karmas that are all around you. So your detachment, your default zone then is just going back to forbearance. Anything comes up that's an ill or something that's to be on the level of karmas and troubles, then you should forbear it. Now, forbearance is then connected to samadhana. Samadhana is a special type of concentration that comes to you that allows you to focus upon reality alone. Like the Upanishadic statements that say, sharpen your intellect and cause it to think about reality, have thoughts of reality alone, and then aim like an arrow, aim that sharpened intellect at the target, Brahman, and release and penetrate it. So in meditation they're talking about you sharpen, you hone your intellect, and then your thoughts follow your beck and call, and they become very sharp and very able to penetrate through Maya. And then you focus them on the goal, supreme goal, and you release and penetrate the mark, the imperishable Brahman. Danur grihit vaupanishadam mahastram, sharam hupasanashita sanjayita, and so forth and so on. So you have this ability now to focus, samadhana, on reality alone. Whereas usually in a meeker or milder state of detachment, you had a mind that was occasionally focused and then occasionally unfocused. Vikshepa, the father of yoga, calls it. You can focus for a while, but then you fall out of focus. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that's like, that kind of mind's called Vikshepa mind. It's like a fly. It lights on sweets sometimes and then lights on filthy things at other times. So it goes back and forth all the time. That's Vikshepa mind, distracted. So samadhana would give you that ability not to concentrate on anything but the reality when you sit for it. So you're holding a certain standard or level of consciousness all the time, and if you can do that in meditation, then the next test for it is out in the world. If you can hold that same state of mind out in the world. You're not mixing, I'm not suggesting that you're mixing this. You're practicing a state of consciousness that is out in the realm of change. That is, you are being and out there is becoming, or changing all the time, but you have no qualms or no doubts about it that you are stable and unchanging. Akhanda, Satchidananda, you are the stable consciousness. So that samadhana, that ability to concentrate, is beginning to introduce you to these higher levels of detachment called adimatra, and then finally to the para-vairagya, the supreme detachment, where you can move about the world without moving, they say. Finally, that gives you faith. So that's how we judge faith in our tradition. It's not just a matter of belief or mere belief. That's not faith at all yet, because it can be shaken. Faith is unshaken or unshakable because it's based upon the power to concentrate, and that's based upon forbearance of all ills, and that's based upon inner peace and self-control, and that's based upon vairagya, detachment, in 10 levels, and then that's based upon your original viveka, discrimination between the real and the unreal. If there were any practice in Vedanta, that would be it. You can see how Vedanta is really a mental realm. It's a mental intellectual realm. It has much, much more to do with that, getting to the source of all ignorance, the source of all problems, than it has to do with trying to work from cart before the horse, trying to solve problems in the world and then somehow get peace of mind that way. You go straight to the source and you implement the 4 treasures and the 6 jewels, they're called. And so if that's about the only trace of a practice that you find in Vedanta. You'll find plenty of practices in yoga, and you'll find plenty of practices in Tantra and so forth, but in Vedanta they have pretty much that one ultimatum for you. Get discrimination between the real and the unreal, and detach from the unreal. So that's why I said it's kind of more of a statement than a question. What you're saying to me here is that instead of why is it that we get discrimination and then can't detach, I'm telling you, get discrimination and then detach. It's not a matter of why do we do that, it's a matter that we must complete the package. We must come the full circle and get inner peace, self-control, and leading up till forbearance, ability to concentrate, and then a strong faith. Now they say from that faith, which is still only the 5th jewel, they say basically that's where you get this 4th treasure called mumukshutvam. And it gives you an idea of how thorough the Vedantists are before they will grant themselves any kind of credit or any kind of ability of attainment. They must have mumukshutvam first. So mumukshutvam means a desire for freedom, a true, sincere desire for freedom. Now, you could easily contrast that with these lower stages of vairagya, detachment, where you really didn't have a strong desire for freedom because you weren't following through. So you were falling back off the practice of discernment and detachment, and still trying to flesh out or to complete this first directive that you were given, to discriminate between the real and the unreal. If you get that 100% under wraps, that is, if it is your final possession, then you name yourself Swami Vivekananda and you can go on and live a perfectly wonderful spiritual life, and you can teach others. But if you haven't got that, or if there's something out of place, or if there's something not complete in it yet, you'll find yourself wandering back to the world, and that brings you into cycles of taking the world to be real, or taking the world to be your oyster, or thinking that you can somehow get fulfillment with objects when never the case ever was, never will it ever be. So that kind of very strict, stern, sobering discrimination between the real and the unreal is called upon by the Vedantists in order that detachment will have a good grounding upon which to unfold and proceed. You see people, hundreds and thousands of them, who are in monastic walk of life have attained that discrimination and detachment. We wish that the householders would begin to implement it more and begin to work it, bring it into the workings of their everyday life, and therefore their lives will be much more balanced and sattvic. Now, there's other questions here, so I can at least leave that as a running commentary and a record on Viveka and Vairagya. I see here 4 questions. The one that connects best next is this one from this student who says, on today, Easter Sunday, which of Christ's teachings would you most like your students to unwrap and take to heart? Well, I can give you my favorite teachings of Christ, because they have to do very much with those Vedantic axioms that I just discoursed a little about, called the 4 jewels and the 6 treasures. They have to do with the Christ that does not have the friendly face that is put on by society, the Christ that was a renunciate, because in India, Vivekananda and beings like that were sannyasins, and they were natural renunciates. They didn't have any doubt about the fact that the world was changing and unreal and illusory and transitory and ephemeral, and all the different words that you can assign to changing particles, if you want to put it that way. So, free of that doubt, they could go about the world and impress upon you the import of these teachings and these boons and gifts from the scriptures, from the revealed scriptures and from the seers on your life. So his best teachings in that regard were teachings like, birds have nests, foxes have holes. Son of Man hath no place to lay his head here. So he's calling, in one breath he could say, look at the birds, birds of the and animals of the field and so forth. You can see how they live on earth. And so he uses them as a metaphor for how to live in harmony with nature. But then in the next breath he could be saying, but the Son of Man really, although you have to put your mind on practical things, the Son of Man has this important ability to discriminate and to detach, to render what is Caesar's to Caesar and take unto yourself what is the Lord's, which is another one of those precious teachings that Christ gave grant unto Caesar what is Caesar's, take unto yourself what is the Lord's. So he's making a move for discrimination there, you see, to try and separate the wheat from the chaff, and to make sure that you don't seek after things of the world because they're illusory, because they're ephemeral, and that you detach from them and know the distinction between Purusha and Prakriti, between the sentient spirit and the insentient matter. Then you can have a relationship with matter that works. And very few people can claim that. They're having very much problem in their relationship with matter. And matter means everything from nature and trees and water and oceans to bodies and relationships with people. That's all a part of form, the world of name and form, or nama-rupa, they call it in Vedanta. Nama-rupa desha kala nimitta, if you want to put it more specifically. Name and form in time and space based on karma. Those 5 things are another quintuplication, pancha teaching, that are very helpful to keep in mind. Name and form in time and space based on causality, nimitta. So those teachings of Christ help us to draw that sharp line of distinction between the real and the unreal. Others too were maybe even more stark. You would say, one of the Christian mystics said, you're a peacemaker. And Christ said, I've not come to bring peace. I've come to bring a sword. And with the sword, I will separate father from son and mother from daughter-in-law. So we talk about how family is so precious, but the seers say how family is such a problem. Like Sri Ramakrishna's favorite saying is that the world is a deep pit and your relatives are vipers inside. So he wasn't making any bones about it, as they say. He was calling a spade and saying how this realm of ancestors that people are coming in and out of in cycles is the pool of rebirth that the seers talk about. This is where souls are being drawn from, the realm of the ancestors back to earth, and then the earth worship their ancestors and they go back to the ancestors. That's called going to heaven. Heaven to earth to hell in our tradition, and therefore the Vedantists want to transcend that. Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree so he could get out of that cycle of birth and death and see it. Get out of the river, he called it, river of time, basically, and detach himself from it. So when you say, I've not come to bring peace, sounds like that's the first noble truth of Christianity to me, because the first noble truth of Buddhism is there is suffering. So it's the same thing to me. There is suffering, I have not come to bring peace, means there is no peace here on earth. There's never been peace on earth. There's only been this combination of peace and war going on all the time, and nobody's ever stopped that cycle from happening. There's always been pleasure and pain. Nobody's ever stopped that from happening on earth. So these deluding pairs of opposites, Krishna says in the Gita, dvandva mohena, are what you need to transcend. And that's causing your mind to be distracted, which is the reason why you can't detach once you get discrimination. You can see how they're living in peace and others are living in sorrow, how some are balanced and some are in confusion all the time. But then you can't yourself move towards that station of eternal peace. That's another teaching actually that comes to mind. Verily I say unto thee, that he who loves his life shall lose it. But he who hates his life will have it given back to him in eternity. Something like that, to paraphrase. So basically, if you love your life in Maya, then of course you're taking the unreal for the unreal, and there's suffering, and you'll lose your life. It sounds to me like the same thing as Patanjali's fifth klesha. Clinging to life, he called it. But you have ignorance, you have attachment, you have aversion, you have egotism, and then you have clinging to life. So Patanjali, the father of yoga, doesn't want you to cling to life. That's fear of death. So he who loves his life shall lose it is a correlative saying in Christianity with Patanjali's yoga. You give it up. You give up life. You don't cling to it. And then because you're unattached, detachment, then you've reached a high level of detachment, then you can live free. You can have a desire for freedom and you can get free. That's the point of the matter. Once you're free, you can look back on it and compare notes, as Vivekananda used to say. Talk about it and discuss it, like in satsang. But until you're free, you really are just giving it mere lip service. So you have to actually put these teachings into practice and attain them. So those are, I'd say, 4 teachings right away that are very important to the meaning of Easter. This resurrection really isn't the physical body standing back up and moving around again. I don't believe in that. It's dead, it's gone. He'd then know more how body lives and goes. Its task is done. Let karma float it down. Let one put garlands on, another kick this frame. So once the body's gone, it's gone. There's no reason to recall it. It's going to come back again anyway in another form in reincarnation. So why are you so attached to that one body, Holy Mother said, which is just in the end a few pounds of ash? What's this hubbub about the body? So really what is meant there is this resurrection means subtle body. It's the teaching on the subtle body that's given. So that's a clarifying move on the part of Indian philosophy that will give you discrimination and detachment in a more intense form, adimatra or para vairagya. Because now you've understood that everything comes from the subtle body, everything from a ghost to a vision of a seer comes from the subtle body. So you have this subtle body inside of you, and all bodies, all physical bodies come from that, and then they dissolve back into that. Just like in a dream, you create bodies, and then you take them back in and dissolve them, and you wake up from your dream body and you're back in this body again. So the teaching of the subtle body brings clarity to the fact that most, the burning bush and things that you see out in nature are just symbols for something that's happening in a body that possibly you don't know about yet, because you're not practicing discrimination and detachment, so you don't know the difference between matter and spirit. Therefore, you don't know the difference between matter, subtle body, causal body, and spirit. It's not just so easy to know, just to make a distinction between matter and spirit, but you have to know these in-between levels of consciousness too, stages of consciousness or intelligence, and where it comes from. So that's going to entail some deeper contemplation and meditation in you. You have to eke out your subtle body and think of it as a separate body from the physical body at first, and then begin to contemplate it and meditate on it. And then from that, eke out your causal body and begin to meditate on your causal body, which is formless. The causal body is formless. It's where all of form went to out of its inception. It came from the causal body, and it goes back into the causal body, and that's what you're calling birth, life, and death. But you should be calling it birthless, deathless state. Should be calling it projection and dissolution, not birth and death. Because there is an underlying substratum for all that. That's one of the next questions. One of the proofs of the Purusha has to do with inferring the presence of a reality that is the coordinator of our varied experiences. Can you elaborate on this? The mind-ego complex coordinates the varied experiences of our senses. What gives the clue to something more subtle? That clue is what I was just talking about prior to this question, is this intelligence. Meditate on the subtle body and the causal body, you'll find out the connecting power of intelligence there. And speaking about discrimination, you'll begin to discriminate between the prana and the akasha, which is the fourth question here. The prana and the akasha have a connection or a relationship like Purusha and Prakriti do, but prana falls more on the sentient side and akasha falls more on the insentient side. Prana is life force or energy, and akasha is space, matter. But space also is divided into gross, subtle, and causal. It would have to be, if you have three bodies that go with it, then you're going to have three spaces that the bodies occupy. So your gross body occupies the physical space, your subtle body occupies the pranic space, and the causal body occupies the formless space, or unmanifested nature, where everything came from in potential. So these are three sets, they're called triputis. These are three sets of three that you put together. You can also put them together with the A, U, and M of Om, and then you begin to understand what the word means. And then you begin to understand another of our favorite teachings of Christ. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Three levels, right, he's talking about. Beginning was the Word, and then the Word was with God, and then the Word was God. So there's three levels of understanding the Word there that go with the three bodies, that go with the three spaces. And all of them infused by intelligence, and the intelligence moves on prana. Prana is like a great dragon bird, a Garuda, that carries souls from birth to life to death, or better put, from the gross to the subtle to the causal body, and back again. So using the discriminatory process is not just a matter of, well, put it this way, at first it's a matter of separating the real from the unreal, but once you have that separation complete, then through the power of detachment that's vested in you, you can begin to inspect the interior realms, kingdoms of heaven within you. Before that, you had no idea what they were. You were just thinking them to be figments of your imagination, like the psychologists are telling you about and so forth. Well, it's just a figment of your imagination. But now you're inspecting them with your consciousness brought to bear. Now the Purusha is inspecting Prakriti for signs of higher wisdom, and eventually is able to withdraw completely from Purusha, from nature, and exist in its own subtle nature, in its own causal nature, in its own supreme nature. That's called samadhi. So these great words, samadhi, satori, beatific vision, nirvana, nirvikalpa, asampragyata, in all different walks of life, in different religions and in different levels, have been coined, if you will, as terms that speak for the existence of Brahman, existence of Allah, existence of Almighty Father, the existence of the infinite, the existence of the eternal, as opposed to the non-eternal. So to discriminate between the real and the unreal, the eternal and non-eternal, the sentient or the insentient, the abiding and the changing, is the whole art of spiritual life as far as great teachers and great teachings like Buddhism and Vedanta are concerned. From there, then, one can begin to inspect at their leisure almost, without any fear, without any doubt, without any misgivings, without any remorse, without any grief, which, by the way, are all things that happen in Maya. They'll be free of those things, and they'll be able to inspect the interior and the anterior. As the interior means everything that's going on within the mind and intelligence, and the anterior means everything that went on before mind and intelligence even arrived here in this akasha, this physical akasha. It had other akashas it moved through. And you prove that to yourself every night in sleep, when you move, when your consciousness moves to dreaming and it moves to deep sleep, which is formless, and comes back again. Your consciousness is also inspecting the interior and the anterior. If it goes all the way back to the source of origins, Utpatti it's called, then it will see the light of Brahman, which happens very rarely to most beings, even practitioners, happens very rarely to them. Even adept practitioners see it very seldomly. But to see it and to catch a glimpse of it then is the proof of the Purusha, as we're saying here. It's a proof of the witness of consciousness. It's the one who coordinates all experiences. It's the underlying substratum, is how they call it. Or it's the witness of all phenomena. It's the unmoved mover. All of those things are called the 6 proofs of the Purusha, which is one of the questions here, which I won't have time to answer in any more depth. But that will be the source of your meditation then, from then on. If you can prove it to yourself in all those different ways, then there's no reason why you should stop at mere discrimination alone. You should go on and detach from all those things, but make sure it's done under the auspice of your own inspection. That's detachment. When you inspect a thing, you come to know it, you lose fear of it. And when you lose fear of it, you've mastered it. And then once you've mastered it, you should call it your own. So, to end here, I'll say a beautiful teaching of my teacher on Easter. He said that renunciation is not condemnation, it's deification. So when you see a thing as it is, then you can truly call it your own. So we start out with neti neti, distinction between the real and the unreal, and through the practice of detachment in its 10 levels, all the way through to inner peace, self-control, and the attaining of concentration and faith, then we can come full circle. See, and all of this is Brahman. That's how they get to that great statement. All is Brahman. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Sarvosmi, all this is. And that's called iti iti. So between the stages of neti neti and iti iti, there's all of this to flush out, you see, and to inspect. If you're staying just at the viveka process and you can't yet just detach from the unreal, then you're going to have to, with the exercise of will and the help of your spiritual practices, you're going to have to make an opening in Maya. That's how Sri Ramakrishna called it. He said, one day I was sitting meditating and I, just like, carving on something and making an opening suddenly, my consciousness opened through the Maya and I could see the light. So you have to make an opening for yourself. And that's done with your own consciousness, the force of your own will. As Krishna said, it should be, and it quite often is, that grace aside, sadhana aside, and so forth, some people get their enlightenment through the force of their own will. So he's mentioning that as one of the ways to enlightenment that he favors very highly. If a person can do it on their own without bothering God, without asking for grace, or without praying for help, then that's admired by the Lord, by the Mother of the Universe. So here I know we've gone a little bit over time, so we can end with a chant. Om Bhadram Karnabhihi Sriniyama Devaha Bhadram Pasyema Akshabirya Jatraha Stirairangayishtushtavam Sastanavir Vishema Devahitam Yadayuhu. May we see with these eyes what is good and spiritual. May we hear with these ears what is noble and uplifting. And may we, while worshipping the Lord and Mother of the universe with healthy minds and bodies, live a life which is beneficial to ourselves and to all other beings. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om Hari Om Hari Om Tat Sat.